Let's break down tariffs. They're a word you hear tossed around in the news, especially when politicians talk about trade wars or protecting American jobs. But what do they actually mean for you, me, and the global economy? Imagine you want to buy a widget from another country. A tariff is the tax the government charges when it crosses the border. It's not just a fee for fun, it's a deliberate policy tool that affects the price of almost everything imported, from electronics to clothing to food. It's like a cover charge for entering Club America, making foreign goods pricier so you'll buy local instead. The higher the tariff, the more expensive that imported item becomes, nudging shoppers toward products made at home. The goal? Protect domestic industries from foreign competition. By making imports cost more, tariffs are supposed to give American factories, farmers, and small businesses a fighting chance to compete and grow. Enter Donald Trump, who saw tariffs as both economic protection and a tool for international leverage. He argued that America had been taken advantage of for too long, and tariffs were his way of fighting back. His administration used a 1977 law, the IEEPA, to impose sweeping tariffs on goods from around the world, claiming it was about national economic security. This law, originally meant for emergencies, suddenly became a weapon in the trade arsenal. This wasn't just a few products, it was a global trade war, with tariffs on everything from Chinese electronics to Canadian lumber. Billions of dollars worth of goods were suddenly more expensive, and the world took notice. The idea was that tariff revenue would flow into the US Treasury and force other countries to negotiate on America's terms. In theory, this would strengthen the US economy and bring foreign leaders to the bargaining table. But the sledgehammer approach hit allies too, sparking retaliatory tariffs and a messy web of economic conflict. Countries struck back with their own tariffs, targeting American exports and escalating tensions worldwide. Businesses and consumers everywhere felt the impact, as the policy upended decades of global trade norms. Prices rose, supply chains were disrupted, and uncertainty rippled through markets, leaving many to wonder if the pain was worth the gain. In the end, it was less chess, more flipping the board and calling it a win. A bold move that left the world scrambling to pick up the pieces. With billions in tariffs imposed without Congress's approval, small businesses in several states challenged the administration. Their argument, only Congress can levy taxes, and using the IEEPA for broad tariffs was an overreach. The case reached the Supreme Court, raising a huge constitutional question about separation of powers. Challengers said the IEEPA was for true emergencies, not long-term economic policy. Even conservative justices questioned whether the president had gone too far, especially with tariffs on allies. At stake $90 billion already collected, and potentially much more if the court ruled against the administration. For Trump, a loss would be a direct blow to his signature economic policy and a massive budget headache. On November 25, 2025, the Supreme Court ruled against the Trump administration. The justices said using the IEEPA for broad, long-term tariffs was unconstitutional. The law was meant for real emergencies, not for rewriting trade policy. The ruling immediately halted collection of these tariffs, bringing relief to businesses. The court reaffirmed that Congress, not the president, controls trade and taxation. This decision set a precedent, limiting future presidents' ability to use emergency powers for economic policy. The message: the executive branch must respect the constitutional balance of power. So, what did tariffs actually do? Let's break it down. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods, and when they're imposed, the effects ripple through the entire economy. They made things more expensive, across the board. Everyday items from groceries to electronics saw price hikes as companies passed on the extra costs to consumers. Costs were passed down the supply chain, so consumers paid more for everything from washing machines to cars. Even products made in America often use imported parts, so the price increases were hard to avoid. Small businesses relying on imported parts saw profits squeezed, leading to higher prices, layoffs, or cutbacks. Many struggled to stay afloat as their costs rose, and customers pulled back on spending. The policy meant to help American industry often hurt it instead. Some factories closed, and workers faced job insecurity as companies tried to adapt to the new reality. Internationally, countries retaliated with their own tariffs, hitting American exports like soybeans and bourbon. Farmers and manufacturers who depended on global markets suddenly found themselves shut out or facing steep new barriers. Global supply chains were disrupted and uncertainty soared. Companies delayed investments and logistics managers scrambled to find new suppliers or routes. While tariffs brought in revenue, economists argued the costs to growth and investment were far greater. The uncertainty made businesses hesitant to expand or hire, slowing economic momentum. The trade deficit sometimes shrank, but mostly because both imports and exports fell, a sign of economic slowdown, not strength. Less trade meant fewer opportunities for American businesses. The Congressional Budget Office even had to lower its revenue estimates by $1 trillion, reflecting the broader economic drag caused by the tariffs. In short, the grand experiment backfired in unexpected ways, leaving businesses, workers, and families to deal with the fallout for years to come. The chaos was clearest in food prices. Every trip to the grocery store became a reminder of how quickly the world was changing. By late 2025, U.S. retail food costs had jumped 40% in a single year, squeezing families and forcing many to make tough choices at the checkout. Tariffs were a major cause, driving up the cost of imported goods and sending shockwaves through global markets. The administration scrambled to contain the fallout, granting tariff breaks on Brazilian goods in hopes of easing shortages and calming prices. But this move had unintended consequences. It crashed global coffee prices, hurting farmers abroad and adding to the sense of instability. Meanwhile, U.S.-China trade tensions led to a fragile truce, but the damage was already done. American companies like Nvidia saw their China revenue plummet, as new barriers and uncertainty made business riskier than ever. Tariffs proved a blunt tool, often punishing American consumers and businesses as much as foreign competitors. Europe wasn't spared. Transatlantic relations frayed as the U.S. imposed new trade barriers. A 15% U.S. tariff on EU goods sent shockwaves through European industries, from cars to wine. And a staggering 50% tariff on steel and aluminum soured relations even further, leading to protests and factory slowdowns. The US tried to pressure the EU on digital rules, hoping to gain leverage in the tech sector, but Europe refused to back down. Instead, tariffs expanded to hundreds more products, touching nearly every corner of the global economy. Even close allies like Japan and Switzerland faced steep tariffs, straining relationships that had been stable for decades. And even Canada, America's neighbor and longtime partner, felt the chill as cross-border trade slowed. Canada's Prime Minister warned that the world could move on without U.S. leadership, as G7 allies looked for new ways to cooperate. The result was fractured alliances and a weakened U.S.-led global order, with old friendships tested by new realities. Retaliation and uncertainty became the new normal. Global supply chains suffered as companies struggled to adapt to shifting rules and rising costs. Coordinated action on big issues, like climate change and security, grew harder as trust eroded. The trade wars left everyone worse off, not just America's rivals. Workers lost jobs, businesses closed, and markets tumbled. The world economy became more fragmented, with countries turning inward and old partnerships breaking apart. The old order was breaking down under the strain, leaving a world more divided and uncertain than ever before. Did the White House give up after the Supreme Court ruling? Not a chance. Even before the decision, the administration was preparing backup plans. Now they're pivoting to other trade laws like Section 301 and Section 122 to try to reimpose tariffs under new justifications. It's like swapping a bazooka for a grenade, same goal, different tool. Removing tariffs is politically tough. Industries that benefit will fight to keep them, and no one wants to look soft on trade. So don't expect a quick return to pre-tariff days. The trade war is evolving, not ending. Meanwhile, the administration is pitching ideas like a $2,000 tariff dividend for every American, though economists say the math doesn't add up. It's classic politics, promising to give you your own money back, minus a hefty fee. Where does this leave America? The Supreme Court decision is a turning point for U.S. trade policy. One path, return to rules-based trade, working with allies and using tariffs sparingly. The other, continue aggressive, America-first nationalism, seeking any legal way to keep tariffs in place. The choice will shape relationships with allies, global stability, and the economy. A hybrid approach is likely, some protectionism, some cooperation. The appetite for sweeping free trade deals is gone, but a tough stance on China remains bipartisan. The era of unchecked globalization is over, but now Congress, not just the president, will decide what comes next. The debate over America's trade future is just beginning. So, what does all this mean for you? In the short term, prices may ease, but don't expect instant relief. Tariffs have been baked into supply chains, so it'll take time for costs to fall. Imported food and drink, like wine, were hit hard. Prices rose, sales fell. With the Supreme Court's decision, some tariffs will disappear, and that bottle of Bordeaux might get cheaper. More importantly, the ruling puts Congress back in charge of trade and taxes, making the process more transparent and accountable. No more one-person trade wars. Big changes now require public debate. The world is watching. Will America rebuild alliances or keep fighting trade battles? The answer will shape jobs, prices, and global relationships for years. Today's ruling didn't end the story, but it changed the plot. The next chapter affects us all,